Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. And we are so pleased that you have joined us here this afternoon to speak to another absolutely fantastic author. Today, we will hear about, I'm going to show you this on my iPad, which is not working very well, but you can see The Ghosts of Paris by Tara Moss. Look at that incredibly evocative cover, and we will talk with Tara about that in about 30 seconds. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, as always, the USA Today bestselling author of 13 novels of suspense, number 14 coming up in February, called The House Guest, which is sort of Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise. So you can be sure you will be hearing about that very, very soon when the time comes. But what you will be hearing about right now today is The Ghosts of Paris. I'm just going to make this iPad work. Come on, sister. I'm going to make this work. It's not working. The Ghosts of Paris by... You're with me on this, aren't you? This is live, everybody. Thank you, Tara. This is The Ghost of Paris, a novel by Tara Moss, which is atmospheric and evocative and fantastic, starring her brilliant main character, Billy Walker. And let me just read you what Fiona Davis said. Oh, but look at all of you who are here. Anissa is here saying, hello, Hank and Tara. Loved this book. Sherry Steuben is saying, excited for a World War II book, one of my favorite genres. Diane Dick is here. Sharon is here saying hi from Minnesota. So your fans and new readers are all here today. And speaking of fans, here's what Fiona Davis said about The Ghosts of Paris. Hold it up again, Tara, because I'm not going to fight with this iPad anymore. Perfect. Billy Walker, says Fiona Davis, Billy Walker is a tough-talking, glamorous feminist who's as adept with a pistol as she is on the dance floor, haunted by a tragic past and unafraid to take on the darkest of foes. What did you think when you read that?
I love that. And I just I love Fiona and her work as well. And it's really gratifying to hear from readers, and particularly, your peers, when other authors also love your work and there's that mutual admiration. Of course, that's one of the things we live for, isn't it, Hank? We love to hear that kind of feedback. And I guess after a couple of years of writing something, often in isolation, because being an author is very isolating, it's just so beautiful when the work is out there and you know that it's being understood by other readers, because that's how I want Billy to come across. That's who she is to me. It's nice to know that she lands in people's psyches and in their hearts in the same way she does for me.
Well, she is irresistible, and I want to talk to you about her a little bit coming up in a minute. Tell us, paint a picture of where you are right now. I'm in rainy Boston, Massachusetts.
I'm in Victoria, BC, on Vancouver Island. This is where I was born and raised. I've lived in New York. I've lived in Paris. I've lived in, as you can see, Ghosts of Paris. I've lived in Europe, and I have lived in Australia. And now I'm back in my birthplace. So it is sunny and gorgeous right now out the window. There's an incredibly distracting view here in my office of the waterfront and sunlight reflecting off the water. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's like the last few days of summer, and that is making it difficult to be stuck to the screen when I'm working on my next novel. But that's what we do, isn't it, Hank?
That is what we do, no matter what the gorgeous view is outside. And you were telling me earlier that this is a big day in your family.
It is. My daughter went to school today with our new school. She's going into grade 6. She's learning, she's French immersion. So she's got a new language, a new school, new friends, and this new school year all starting today. So a lot of anxiety and excitement around today. And so far it's going really well. And that's just beautiful to see.
That is wonderful. What a little treasure she must be, marching off to school in a whole new experience.
She really is. She's 11, Hank, and she's already like me. She's got ridiculously long limbs. So she's all limbs and long blonde hair, and just she's just incredible. She stands like this a lot, which is,
you
inherited that from me, Hank, and maybe there's a touch of Billy in there too.
I bet there is. I was going to say that I think that you must have imbued her with a sense of herself and a sense of power and a sense of adventure, just like Billy Walker. And we want to talk about that in a minute. Look at all the people who are coming. Here is Renee and Shannon and Lynn and Joanne and Janine. Everyone is here to hear about The Ghosts of Paris by Tara Moss. If you have just joined us, this is Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan. A Mighty Blaze was started about 2.5 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic by the wonderful powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us talking about books and keep us learning about new books, keep us discussing books, keep us meeting new authors and falling in love again with our favorite authors. And that is why we are here today, to let you meet Tara Moss. Let me tell you a little bit about this. And forgive me, Tara, but I'm going to read just a little bit of your bio so the people who have arrived today know who you are a little bit. Tara Moss is a Canadian-born best-selling author and award-winning human rights and disability advocate. She has written 14 books of fiction and nonfiction, published in 19 countries in over a dozen languages, including her #1 international best-selling memoir, The Fictional Woman. Her latest book is the historical crime thriller, The Ghosts of Paris, following on the international bestseller, The War Widow, another fantastic book, both featuring 1940s staunchly feminist, champagne-swilling, fast-driving Nazi hunter investigator Billy Walker. I mean, you don't even need to hear anymore.
I love that. I love that description of Billy. Just that the fast driving, fast talking, champagne swilling, like Hank, she's part of our girl gang. Don't you just want to hit the bar with Billy and just see what the night brings? Like I just
Well, I do, but I have to say, sort of personally, you are Billy to me. When I read your books and when I inhale your books, I see you perfectly, and there's just no way out of it, no matter what you think Billy looks like. We all think she looks just like you and behaves just like you, and I can envision the whole thing. So congratulations on that. Let me tell the crowd a little bit more about you, though, because this is really important and serious, and I want you all to know this. Moss is a long-standing UNICEF ambassador. In 2021, she was chosen as a global change maker by Conscious Being magazine for her disability and chronic pain activism, and was a recipient of the Honorary Citizen Award for the City of Victoria for her work on accessibility rights. In 2015, she received an Edna Ryan Award for her significant contribution to feminist debate, speaking out for women and children and inspiring others to challenge the status quo. And in 2017, she was recognized as one of the top 50 global diversity figures in public life for using her position in public life to make a positive impact in diversity. I mean, this description brings tears to my eyes. And when you all get to know Tara a little bit more, it will bring tears to your eyes as well. You have used your life to matter, and we stand and applaud you at every turn. As we said, she lives with her family in British Columbia, and you can visit her. Please do, but not right now when the show is over. Just go check out her website at taramoss.com and all over social media. So I'm going to stop talking because I want Tara to talk a little bit about, as we talk about The Ghost of Paris, which I try to get to come up on how many years have I done this? And how often does this happen? Never. The Ghost of Paris. Talk a little bit about just basically the world of this book and what this book is about. Just a little bit about the plot.
Thank you, Hank. And what a beautiful introduction. It means a lot to me. I do try to use my experiences in the world to contribute in some ways. And some of that, I think, also ends up in the books. I mean, we're here talking about our love of reading and storytelling and the importance of storytelling. And I think all of our experiences in life help to give us a broader understanding of things as authors, so we can give, that little bit of a different perspective in our work. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do with Billy Walker. So she is a female PI in the 1940s. And we're all, I think, familiar, especially in the crime genre, with the wonderful hard-boiled moment that happened in the mid-century, the 30s and 40s, incredible Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade. I'm a big fan of that classic detective fiction from the time, looking at Raymond Chandler and also looking at, Cornell Woolrich. And what I wanted to do was to try to put a twist on that and shine a light on characters who did actually exist at the time in some form, who are authentic to the period, but who we really haven't celebrated and kind of had a look at yet. And Billy Walker represents that. So she's an incredible, resilient woman in the 1940s. She was a war reporter working in Europe. And when the war ended, she came back to Australia, her birthplace, and reopened her late father's detective agency to put some of those skills at work. And in The Ghosts of Paris, we see a new client walk in her door that wants her to go to Paris and London and look for her missing husband. And this touches a bit of a nerve for Billy, because her own husband, a photojournalist in World War II, went missing in 1944. So there's a crossover there between the professional and the personal. I love those types of connections because they're so explosive for characters. And so as readers, I hope that you're going to be swept away on this journey, taken to Sydney, Australia, to Paris and France, and to London, and in that period, and just pulled along by both the professional storyline there and also Billy's personal experiences, which end up being, yes, quite volatile and quite explosive, I must say.
And where did Billy? I mean, I understand your goal of showing a person like Billy who really may have existed, certainly did exist, but she's this glorious example of duality. I mean, she's vulnerable, but she's tough, and she's determined, but she's loving. She's astonishingly stylish, but willing to do anything that she needs to do to get whatever it is done. How did the fabulous Billy develop in your mind?
That's a great question, Hank. I've written 14 books now, and Ghost of Paris is number 14, and I've had strong female central characters in all of them. That's just the type of book I like to read, and it's what comes from me naturally. And when we look at the 1940s, again, harking back to some of those classics, we see that there's a focus on the male, grizzled kind of PI, the tough guy with his fedora. And we're not really thinking about the women of the time, but there were female private investigators in that time. They existed. I've found them in newspaper articles, I've found them in diaries and documents, but they're just not really represented in the literature. So already you have that foundation there. And when you look at incredible women like Virginia Hall, Nancy Wake, and if you don't know who these women are, look them up. They're extraordinary. I wrote a piece in Ms. Magazine a couple of years ago about those women and how amazing they are. You get a glimpse at just how extraordinary, ordinary people, if you will, were during that period. And Billy is an example of that. So with my love of the 1940s, she pretty much arrived fully formed when it was time to write a new series. And I was like, who's it going to be about? Who's my central character? Well, Billy Walker pretty much landed in my lap. And I think it was a combination of things. It was my love of hard-boiled and film noir. She looks a bit like Ava Gardner in The Killers. You've got that kind of moment happening historically. But those strong women just motivate me so much. And I come by it honestly, too, because there's strong women in my family, Hank. And I wanted to, if it's okay, tell you a very quick story about my Oma. So my grandmother on my mom's side, I'm going to show you all a picture of her on a bicycle. Now, this bicycle is key, actually, because she was in Holland during World War II. And during the Nazi occupation, and her husband, my Opa, was taken by force by the Nazis, and he went into a work camp in Berlin, which was a munitions factory, put into slave labor. So you can imagine this woman, she's in Nazi occupied territory now. She's got a couple of young children. She's trying to save her husband. He had been a baker by trade, and what she did Cornelia was her name. She smuggled flour and sugar in the hollows of this bicycle and cycled all the way from Numansdorp to Berlin, which would have taken days and gone through several Nazi checkpoints in order to deliver the flour and sugar, the smuggled stuff, to her husband. He used those ingredients to bake bread in the munitions ovens to bribe the Nazi foreman, and eventually it worked. He managed to get on the Nazi foreman's good side enough that he got given a day pass, and he used that day pass to escape. He actually commandeered a horse and took off back to Holland and ended up mostly doing it by foot at night in the cover of darkness. And so you look at someone like my Oma, a regular woman in times that were anything but normal. We can't even imagine today what that would have been like. And just looking at those extraordinary things these so-called ordinary women did. And that, for me, is part of the inspiration for Billy Walker and this series, is shining a light on those types of stories that we haven't heard before, those types of people who are it's entertaining, but also just kind of like, wow, knowing that's actually how people lived at the time and what they managed to do.
I mean, it's breathtaking, and I wish we could see all of Renee and Shannon and Diane and Pamela saying amazing story. And this is one of those moments where you think, I wonder what I would have done. I wonder how I would have handled this. And that's why it's so much fun to read about Billy Walker. But I'm interested in, when did you hear that story about your grandmother and grandfather? Who told you that? And what did you think at the time?
My Oma and Opa didn't like to talk about the war. Like a lot of people, they came across to Canada with young kids and like a suitcase and a few dollars, and they settled here. And I have such fond memories of spending every weekend with them and hearing their stories. And it was actually hard to get them to talk about the war. But when we did, as kids, managed to kind of push them enough, like, tell us what you did, tell us what happened. These were the stories that started to come out. And that was a really central one, because it was probably what saved my Opa's life. It's probably what kept the family together. Another thing that they lived through was the house in Holland where they were living. And I've since gone back to Numansdorp as an adult and visited this spot. A bomb actually fell through the roof, but didn't explode. It was faulty. So again, living on a knife's edge, just that you think, what are the chances? Everything is life or death in that situation. And they were fortunate enough to have that bomb come through their roof, but not explode. And to have him working in this Nazi work camp with slave labor there, like a brutal part of the reality of World War II. And yet he managed to escape because he was a good baker and because his wife had a plan and was smuggling him those ingredients. So you just never know when those little chances that you take might be the thing that save you or people you love. And that's for me one of the things that really makes this period come alive. It's personal.
And you can feel that in Billy Walker, the idea that you never know what chances you're going to take that's going to make something happen for better or for worse, and how the desire for justice and love and peace and honor, those are the kinds of things that drive people to do these things, especially a tough, vulnerable, smart, savvy person like Billy Walker, who's taken over the detective agency from her father, this legacy. And in walks a woman with a problem, just like the beginning of every noir. Broad walks into my detective office. But as an adult, thinking again about your grandparents, what was it that made you decide to delve into, as a writer, to delve into writing historical fiction?
I guess in a way, it's surprising that I didn't do so before. So I've written in 4 genres now, Hank. I wrote initially in contemporary crime thriller, which I love, and Mac Vanderwall was that main character, an amazing kick-ass woman who literally has a great roundhouse kick and rides motorbikes, And then I wrote a YA-focused series, a paranormal series, and I also wrote nonfiction. And I guess for me, writing in these different genres, I was like, what's my What's the next thing for me? What am I? And here I am, someone, Hank, who's fascinated by human stories and therefore fascinated by history. Okay, I don't think you can be fascinated by the human experience without wanting to at least look a little ways back. Not only looking at what's happening right now, which is, extraordinary and complex, but dialing the time machine back a little bit and thinking, where have we come from? What about the people around us? What have they been through? What are their pasts like? And that brought me to the 1940s, where all of these rich stories really, fueled my interest since I was a young person. So in a way, my obsession with research, and famously, I am obsessed with research. I've been set on fire for research. I've been choked unconscious for research. Do not try this at home, folks. I'm going to say that right now. No, do not do this. I wouldn't even probably do it again, but I did these things for research, for crime research. I can see the look on your face, Hank. You're like,
I'm
what?
thinking, yeah, Tara, that's good.
What?
Just keep talking about. I'm trying to think, why would she do that? And what?
Why would she do that? I am just fascinated by human experiences, and I will get as close to them as I can. So I've been
Unconscious is maybe a little close.
yeah,
So
maybe a little touch close.
maybe a little close. Let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about history before we go on to other kinds of research, because I wonder. And when I look over here, you all, I'm looking at the comments, which Sherry is saying the things you do for your art. Yeah, don't, as Tara says, don't try this at home. But in writing historical fiction, one of the things that you have to deal with is that there are things that did happen. There is reality that's a knowable, researchable thing. How do you deal with using that reality, that template of reality, to weave your fiction throughout? How do you do that?
It's just so rich, Hank. It's incredibly rich to have that context. So for me, I'm really interested in the experiences of different people and different groups of people. And we have I guess I get to have the fortunate result of hindsight to be able to go and write about this period. We know so much more now, in a way, than people did at the time. So we knew what was happening in the concentration camps. We knew about the anti-Semitism and the way it was playing out. We knew, for example, about we know about the experiences of Aboriginal people in Australia during that time, and maybe the average person didn't. But we know that now, and that just creates such ripe and interesting territory for me to research it, to speak to people directly involved if I can, and to be able to include those stories in a way that they just weren't at the time. So I think it makes it all richer. The trick often is to make sure you don't put in too much of the research. I've always got to strip a lot out because I am fascinated. I'm a research nerd, and it's very easy for me to kind of put in too much of that. But it just makes for such a rich context. And the other thing is, I'm always looking for things that resonate today. So if we're looking at, say, workplace relations and the gender pay gap and these sorts of issues, they're very much a live conversation right now in 2022. Well, they were also in the 1940s. And we can kind of drop that into a book. It's real, it's contextualized, it tells you about, the world that these women were living in, but it also does resonate today, and it's fascinating to look at it. Or funny little quirks, like, for example, there's a scene where Billy Walker walks into the Ritz in Paris, a famously beautiful hotel. It's still a landmark today. It's somewhere we all want to go to. But in the 1940s, she walks in there wearing a pair of silk trousers, very fashionable, and she's banned from wearing the pants. They ask her to leave because trousers were banned by the management. And in fact, there was a bylaw up until, I think it was 2013, that women were not allowed to wear trousers in Paris. It was against the law. You needed a police permit, right? Who would think this up? I mean, as a historical writer, you get to drop those things in. And as a reader, you have to actually go, like, Google that and go, really?
I mean, that's one of the thing that's one of the things, many things that's so much fun about reading your novels is that not only are we transported to another time, but we see the connection to now. And
Yes.
there's also such an evocative, atmospheric way of learning history. You know, when I read one of your Billy Walker books, I always feel like come out a little bit smarter about
Oh,
the
love
time, a
that.
little bit more knowledgeable, have more understanding
Mhm,
about the time. Going back to what you were saying about the Ritz and about fashion,
mhm,
fashion is so imbued throughout Billy Walker and throughout these novels, not just what she wears, not
mhm,
just description, but where she is and what the settings were like, not just a coat, but the cut of a lapel or the shape of a heel or the color of nail polish or her famous lipstick. Um, Talk a little bit about I mean, you have this amazing attention to detail in your story when it comes to setting and description and fashion. Not only, and I don't want to keep babbling about this, but not only the fashion of clothing, but the fashion of what furniture looked like, or what the
mhm.
scenery looked like, or what the streets looked like. Take us there and how you bring that to life so gorgeously.
Thank you, Hank. The thing about fashion, first of all, is that there's form in the genre. So if you're looking at Hardboiled, you're looking at, say, Raymond Chandler and Philip Marlowe, that is a character as a private investigator who observes everything and observes what people are wearing. And there's a lot of in detail description in classic Chandler, for example, of Philip Marlowe like assessing a shoe or the cut of a cuff and a collar, because it speaks to the character's social status and their financial situation, and maybe what sort of impression they're trying to make, and maybe what sort of person they are, or what's happening in their life. Are they down on their luck, or have they just bought a new look Christian Dior suit, right? And so for Billy Walker to be a good PI, she needs to be observant like that. And I think being a woman in the 1940s as well gives her a bit of a leg up, if you will, in that department, because she's going to understand seams and she's going to understand hats and things in a way that maybe a male character will have a certain level of understanding with, and she'll just be able to go beyond. So she can determine quite a bit with that. She also needs to use fashion, and does use fashion as a kind of either a form of armor or as a weapon, right? Because she needs to be able to glide into situations, whether it's the upper classes or it's the doss houses, as they called them at the time, and blend in as much as possible. And when she's going to go into an upper class, room, she needs to look like she belongs there. She needs to look like, she's not a PI going and snooping on people. She's just one of the other guests. And in order to do that, she's probably going to have to sew her own garment. She's going to be creative and resilient in the way that she manages all this. And she's got also the background of having her wonderful mother, Ella, who was an aristocrat and has lost her money in the Depression. So Billy has a kind of an understanding of what the upper classes are like, even when they're now, penniless. She kind of gets how the niceties, which fork to use, how to dress, to sort of be able to glide into that situation, get that information, be an observer, do her job without looking like she doesn't belong there. So fashion actually serves a lot of purposes. And it's not just about like, oh, it's pretty, she looks pretty. No, we're hearing really about the context and things like rationing, for example, the coupons they needed for fabrics and things. All of this plays into the characters' experiences of the world and also what they see when they look at one another. So when New Look comes in, and this is very much a New Look style coat here on the cover in 1947, because that's when New Look launched with Christian Dior in Paris. It was sort of outrageous because there was a larger amount of fabric being used after all those rations. So it was kind of controversial. And it's one of the reasons it's still so iconic today, is it made a big impact. So we actually know the context of it. It's not just, hey, there's a pretty coat. It's actually like, wow, this is very different after the utilitarian reusing, making do and mending that's happened in the 40s. Now we've got this kind of 1947 push towards something else. So everything has a context, and I try to only include detail that gets the reader into that context, into that atmosphere. And I hope Billy's understanding of, the cut of a collar and cuff helps with that.
It's gorgeous. I mean, I completely remember my mother looking just like this
Mm.
and talking to me about the new look and how different it was and how unusual. I mean, she was an art student, and so she embraced fashion completely from the moment I was born. This was something that was such a part of her life and such a part of our life. What kinds of things did you look at and read to understand the milieu that your characters were in?
Well, you can, of course, look at fashion magazines looking back to that era, but they're not realistically going to give you a perspective on what people actually wore. No more than as it does today. We don't walk around looking like we're in Vogue, I'm afraid to say. That's just not reality. So you need to look at contemporary to the time sources like documentaries, like, street footage, newsreels. Particularly finding out about women's lives is more difficult because we tend to tell and retell the stories of, the generals and world leaders and the decorated soldiers, but not necessarily the women. And in fact, one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by stories of people like, say, Virginia Hull, the wonderful Allied spy that came out of America, who, by the way, was disabled. I'm also disabled. She was an extraordinary woman who had a prosthetic leg called Cuthbert. She named it Cuthbert, who was wooden leg. You can imagine how heavy that was when she's traveling across the Alps in Europe, pursuing Nazis or being pursued by them. If you're looking at that period and you're looking at all of that, all I can say is there's so much rich detail, and you have to look a little harder to find that detail around women's lives, but it is there. And often you need to go into things like, diaries or the books that, I don't know, they came out in ebook or they haven't been made into a film. Those are the stories that we haven't really celebrated and illuminated yet. And I think that's one of the great pleasures of being an author, that you can actually find those stories that haven't really been told, but are so, so worthwhile.
And I love that you've distilled that for us in The Ghosts of Paris, because I see the light in this. We learn so much about the time, and we feel so much a part of it. Let me ask you though, when was The Ghosts of Paris, was that always the title? Talk a little bit about how you came to that.
Well, the Ghosts of Paris does not refer to the paranormal in this circumstance. It refers really to the long shadow of war, because when there is a conflict that impacts people's lives, and so many millions of people were impacted by World War II, it doesn't just stop when victory is declared and, a conflict on the battlefield ends. People's lives are still completely upturned. They're separated from their homes, displaced, their belongings, maybe, they'll never see the things they had around them, their house, and even trying to find missing people, which is one of the focuses really of The Ghosts of Paris, is trying to find the people who you get separated from in times of conflict. So The Ghosts of Paris really refers in this case to Billy's, broken heart, her memories of her time during the war, which at this point is only a few years before, that lingering trauma. And it does, speaking to my grandparents so many years later, the lingering goes on really for a lifetime, doesn't it? When you're talking about those really huge experiences of families being broken up, of, losing loved ones, and having your world turned upside down. So it's a reference really to the fact that we have these lingering things that haunt us. And in this case, for Billy, it's, both in the sense of her husband, her missing husband, and also just in the changed world that she and everyone else lives in the best way they can. She's thankfully a really resilient character who's managing to push through, but she's also helping a lot of other characters who aren't finding it, as easy, if you will, who aren't as resilient as she is. And that's
Well,
another thing I love about her.
it does speak a lot about her. And one of the things that's fascinating about it is that all the while she's haunted by the knowledge that some people disappear not of their own volition, and some people disappear because they want to. And the war and the end of the war was an easy way to cover up, maybe start over, go away, not be missed, be mourned, but not be noticed that much. And I think that's
Yes.
also a wonderful part of this novel. Before we run out of time, let me quickly not forget to ask you two more things. And one is, there are marvelous characters other than Billy Walker in this novel, and one of whom is Sam the secretary.
I love
And
Sam.
he is fantastic. Just introduce us to him briefly, and Billy's relationship with him.
So Billy's sidekick, if you will, is her assistant, Samuel Baker. He's a disabled war vet. So he came up against an Italian thermos bomb that has injured his hand, and he's got prosthetic fingers underneath a ever-present black leather glove. And I love this for his character because it gives us insight into what some of the returned vets experienced. There's also John, for example, who's the lift attendant in the building where she has her office, another disabled war vet. And we know that they were everywhere. They came home, those who were fortunate enough to make it back, but they came home changed, whether it was in physical, obvious ways, like in his case, or whether it was psychological only. People were changed after the war, and not only the soldiers, but also nurses and other people who experienced trauma or were up close to it. Sam is just a dish. I love him. And the fact that the army now is like I said, giving us that insight. Well, we don't have any use for you anymore. So his career in the army is over, and it's hard to get a job. You know, there are all these men coming back. It's hard to get a job, and he's like, I don't mind working for a woman. So he finds in Billy a wonderful boss, and she finds in him a wonderful assistant. And then as they spend more time together, you see like what an incredible team they make. And of course, it is fun to have an attractive male assistant to your female PI in the 1940s, but it's also realistic because it was hard to get a job, because it would be unrealistic to have these two women in an office at the time, because the social pressure was such that you had to make room for the returned soldiers. Even Billy's, her father had more office space. And when she reopens the agency post-war, after he's passed, she just takes as small amount of office space as possible because the social pressure is such that she would be really criticized if she didn't allow that space for the men who are coming back. There was a huge amount of pressure on women after the war to sort of like, thank you for working in the factories and the newsrooms and stuff. Now go back home, ladies. Your work is done here, and we don't want to see you again in a professional context. So in a way, her and Sam, they help each other out. And I love their relationship. And yeah, if you haven't read the book yet, I think you might fall a little in love with Sam. I know
Well,
I
I
have.
think we all did. And I love how he knows what he looks like, and he
Yeah.
knows when to use that, which
That's
I
right.
thought was a marvelous personality characteristic. We're running out of time. I'm reminded that I might have forgotten you all, that Tara and her publisher are giving away a copy of The Ghosts of Paris. And I know you're all I know you're all leaving comments right now, and I embrace that, because every comment that you leave means that you are entered to win a copy of The Ghosts of Paris. You lucky people, you will love that. And we will spin the wheel of fun in a couple of minutes. But let me ask you finally, before we take questions from the audience, Tara, about you were talking about the re-engaging of the people with disabilities after the war, and you've spent so much of your life working as an advocate for people with disabilities, as well as other things. Talk a little bit about the evolution of that and why that's so important to you.
Oh, thank you, Hank. Well, I've been involved in human rights for over 20 years, and that probably trickles through to my writing, as I've said. It hopefully gives me a perspective. For example, going into war zones or spending time with refugees in refugee camps gives me a different perspective on what it's like to be displaced, what it's like for those people. I can't speak for them, but it opens my eyes a little bit to that. And I became disabled 6 years ago after a hip injury. and I've got something called complex regional pain syndrome. It is pretty difficult to live with, but we all manage in our ways, and that means you'll usually find me using a walking stick, which I think has great distinction. My walking stick is called Wolfie, so you can find my disability advocacy under Tara and Wolfie on Instagram and on Facebook. And I also sometimes use a wheelchair, which is what I'm using right now as we're chatting. And those mobility aids, I think, are a great, a representation of self-care. You need support sometimes in life. Use that support no matter what other people think of it. And so I'm a big believer in destigmatizing disability and also mobility aid use. As we get older, a lot of older people are reticent to use mobility aids, but also younger people can be given a kind of hard time. You can get a lot of, that I'm so young, Hank, I'm not. But if you don't fit the stereotype of an older person using a cane, then people might look at you and go, what's that for? What'd you do to yourself, or whatever? And so those comments can be quite distracting in life. And so I believe we kind of have to stick together and really present that united front, that whatever support you need in life, use it. That's what mobility aids are for. If you need them, use them. Get out, enjoy life as fully as you can. I certainly do that. And it wouldn't be possible for me to do that without these mobility aids. So I use them proudly.
Well, you're such an inspiration, and all of you, if you don't follow Tara on Instagram, please do, because her photographs are absolutely astonishing and transporting and truly inspirational. So we are so grateful for you, Tara, and for all that you continue to do. It's quite marvelous. Let me ask you, thank you. Here is Bosie giving us your Tara Moss author on IG. Thank you all. Don't go right now. Wait till after this interview so we can see if you win a copy of The Ghosts of Paris by Tara Moss. Let's take some questions, shall we, Bosie? Who has a question for Tara Moss at this point? I know we've had. What was your favorite place, says Sherry. Welcome, Sherry. What was your favorite place that you lived?
Hi, Sherry. Gosh, I love Barcelona. I love the Spanish so much. That's a culture, a bit like here at A Mighty Blaze, it's a culture of people who really appreciate authors. And it's hard to kind of grasp that fully until you're immersed in that culture for a while. I mean, they just love authors and poets and artists, and it's really an elevated part of the culture. Like on every level, they have that history of loving the arts. So being there among the Spanish people, one of my favorite things. It's nice to be back in my birthplace. I love it here in Victoria. Gosh, I love New York. I love LA. I love so many places. It's hard for me to narrow it down, but if I was to talk about a place that's very different from where I am right now, I'd say Barcelona.
And you don't have to pick. This is great. You can just love them all.
My motto is that life is too short to live the same day twice. And for me, that has also translated a lot into travel and living in other places. And I'm not necessarily great with languages, but I've learned like a version of maybe 6 or 7 languages at various times, just to kind of get those insights into different places and different people's experiences. So
you just need to know, do you have this in my size in black?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. That's all I need to know. And also how to order a coffee.
Right. Coffee and wine.
Essential. It's my very large coffee tumbler.
Who else has a question? Thank you, Sherry. Who else has a question? What's Anissa? Welcome, Anissa. Who has been your toughest character to write and why?
Without giving too much away, that's a tricky one, because there's a character in The Ghosts of Paris in the opening sequence, in the prologue, and if you've read it, you'll know who I'm talking about. But if I mention his name now, it will probably give away too much of the plot.
All right, well, we'll stop you.
So I won't say who, but the character in the prologue, the perspective in the prologue, was, at least in recent writing, the most difficult, the toughest to write.
Is it possible to ask why?
I think it was the circumstances in which that character finds themselves, and knowing that it's based entirely on real events. That's the really hard thing about writing historical fiction, is when you're writing about difficulties people are going through, you know that you're basing it on something that's happened. an amalgam. I don't, I'm not writing like a character from real life, a historical figure, and just putting them into fiction and calling it my own. It's an amalgam, but you know that it's based on something people have actually experienced. And that's for me tougher than writing a fantasy character, or which I also love doing. It's harder than writing characters that are really not as connected to reality. Yeah, the world has been amazingly beautiful and joyous for so many people, and also really traumatizing and difficult as well. And so when I venture into those territories, it can be tricky.
And challenging and joyous and wonderful when you conquer that, and that is what it is. Let's take one more question. Who has one more question before we spin the wheel of fun? Renee says, who is your favorite author besides yourself?
Well, it's interesting. I want to give a shout out right now to Stephen King. Okay, now this might seem out of left field, but when I was 10 years old, I was writing Stephen King style novelettes for my classmates. And the reason he comes to mind is that I saw a picture of him from 1983 with the car Christine from the movie, where, if you don't know Christine, it's a very 80s fabulous horror take. And when I was a kid, like a little younger than my daughter is now, I came across that work, and it was super taboo and scary to me and interesting. And it was one of the things that actually motivated me to write. I wrote a Stephen King style novelette for my classmates at elementary school here in Victoria, BC, at Torquay Elementary. They were my first reading audience. And so I really owe it to Stephen King to say, well, actually, you motivated me to keep exploring what it's like to be an author, because I had that first reading audience with all my 10-year-old classmates asking to be written in and killed off, Hank. Can you imagine? And so I admit I haven't read a Stephen King book recently. I've been more caught up in historical fiction and crime fiction, but he was the one, for me that set me on this path. And so absolute props, as they say, for that wonderful story back in the 80s.
Well, he is the master of storytelling. There's nobody who's a better storyteller than Stephen King. Absolutely. But I need to know, what about your story? What was it called?
It was called Black and White Doom. Okay. It was the 80s. I was 10, and the word doom seemed really cool. I would probably not use the word doom now. And I think it was only a while later that they had like Temple of Doom, the Raiders of the Lost Ark as well. Temple of Doom and Doom. So I had Black and White Doom, it was called. And my dad, I forgot about that story for decades. And my dad found it in the attic at the house. Me writing on, in cursive on loose leaf paper as a 10-year-old. So when you ask who my favorite author is, I have like a real soft spot for Stephen King. He is, as you say, Hank, a master storyteller, spectacular. And now I have to probably dive into his new work, just having talked about it. But in recent years, I've read like wonderful authors like Fiona Davis, as we mentioned before, and Hank, and Her Perfect Life. These more crime and historical stories rather than horror. But that's what my beginnings were.
Yep, so many of us. I just ordered his new book today. Absolutely,
Absolutely
irresistible. Let's. We are running out of time. I can't believe it, but I was going to invite you to come back, Tara, and read to us from Black and White Doom.
Oh my gosh, that would be hilarious.
I don't think so. We should have a special edition of Crime Time.
Oh
Dear,
my God.
his very first novel. It could work. We could totally work. We'll talk about that. But Bosie in the back room now, let's ask you to bring out the wheel of fun and spin the wheel of fun to see who is going to win Tara Moss's marvelous The Ghosts of Paris. And there spins the wheel, and I see some new people, which is marvelous. And the winner is A Mighty Blaze Can't Win. We can't win. That's me winning. Go ahead and spin it again. All right, let's do it one more time. It shows you that we are doing this randomly, right? That we don't know. We are Mary Garrett. Mary is a wonderful storyteller. Speaking of storytellers, even her handle is Storyteller Mary. So she knows her stuff, and I know that Mary will love this book. So Mary, email me, and we will get this to you. Not my copy of it. I'm keeping it. But we will get you your very own copy. Tara, thank you so much for being here today. Before I let you all go, let me just say, next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, we will be reading from Bradley Godfrey's Imposter. We will hear from Bradley Godfrey, who is a debut author, and you know I love debuts. So I hope you will all join us next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET for a regular edition. Oh, you know what? I think it might be on at 4:30. I'll let you all know about that, but I think it's going to be on a little bit later, but you will know, you'll hear about it over and over and over. Of course, what time it is, because I do not want you to miss Bradley Godfrey. You can see that I'm reading it because it's all,
Fabulous cover.
isn't it? Look at
Yeah,
that.
so good. I love that.
Bradley Godfrey's Imposter, and we will hear from her next week at 4 or 4:30 or whenever it is. Meantime, right now, Tara, we are hearing from you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being here today.
Oh, Hank, you're such a superstar and so supportive of authors and so supportive of storytelling and readers. And I just have so many wonderful things to say about you. I can't fit it into the next couple of minutes, but I wanted to express I want to express my gratitude. How amazing is Hank? Can we get some of that love in the comments? Hank is amazing. And thank you to Mighty Blaze. And thank you to all of you who tuned in. I really hope you enjoy Billy Walker's adventures. I hope you enjoy The Ghosts of Paris, and just keep reading and enjoying those stories. It's storytelling matters. And thank you for getting these books out there. I really appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure. I can't wait for you all to read The Ghosts of Paris, the new Billy Walker by Tara Moss. And next week at 4:30ish, we will read Brady Godfrey's Imposter. So cannot wait to talk to you about Brady Godfrey next week. Love you all. So glad that you came. And remember, it is always safe inside a book. And we will see you next time.